when does a fetus become a person? And the article that we have is pretty famous, The Defense of Abortion by Judith Jarvis Thompson. And I was fortunate to find a video of her giving a lecture. So we'll get
YouTube TV, watch like fame.
I hate and love telling people that they got the Congress they voted for. Nobody understands.
how many ads do I get?
Consider the directive judgment, Arabic, 1. A ought to toast bread.
So this is one of the most boring lectures I think I've ever found on YouTube. But if you want to find out what she's like,
there is a normative kind K, namely the
here she
kind
is talking
toaster,
about the language of
such that
toaster
A is a
ethics.
member of K, and such that if A doesn't toast bread, then it's a defective member of the kind. It's a defect.
But
What?
that's so you get to see what she looks like. And the
My
style.
judgment about it is normative, not epistemic.
So if you can stand listening to an hour of her speaking, I've done it. Yes, I can. You can survive it. It's pretty interesting, but it gives you an idea of what she's like. But then if we go and look at the article, what did you think of her argument? The metaphor she uses is pretty famous. Imagine that you fall asleep and when you wake up, you find yourself attached to a violinist who would die if you unattach the violinist. So, and this is a world famous violinist. The obvious reason for this is to pick an individual that the community really wants this individual to live, right? Because he's such an important violinist. Itzhak Perlman or you know, someone that you really want him to live. And so, of course, the onus on you is to allow this individual to keep surviving off of you, basically, right? Well, obviously, this is a metaphor for a fetus. Once you find out that you're pregnant, yes, you've got 9 months to spend with this creature, etc. Notice that her this article was published roughly 2 years before the Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade, which of course everyone knows. Yes?
No.
No. Okay. Roe v. Wade essentially made it legal for certain types of abortion to be performed in the United States. Of course, it's since also become a state function, so different states have been fighting against it. So a lot of people were very concerned right from the beginning, right? But her argument, and you could do research, I suppose, to find out how influential was her argument over the Superior Court justices that basically found that, and by the way, as I understand it, the very woman who brought that case has since changed her mind and is against abortion. I guess you've heard that, right? But it's still law, right? Although there have been encroaches on it, and of course it's as I mentioned, it's a fairly serious issue. I joked, I shouldn't, but because it is a really serious issue. Even right here in Eagle River, yes, I think it's a serious issue. People have been killed over it. The students from UAA who are members of Christian-affiliated organizations are always being asked to volunteer to walk around the clinic where the abortions happen in Anchorage, right? So if you've ever seen folks there with signs, wave to them because they're Anchorage, well, at least Anchorage students, some of them, UAA students. But so the question is, I mean, I have one friend who's had several miscarriages, and as far as she's concerned, a fetus isn't a person. It is a bloody blob, basically, I suppose, depending on the stage, which you've, and I'm terrible at this. I've really got to apologize if any of you have, Douglas, you've never had an abortion, I'm pretty sure. But I know my wife and I could not figure out how to make children. We had a book that explained, the steps you take. None of that worked for us. We actually got a certificate from her doctor that said, give this couple children, because we can't make them ourselves. And they did. We fortunately found agencies that gave us 4 different children.
It's a perfect example of too much philosophy.
I suppose you could have too much philosophy, but I personally love philosophy. I also love cake. I've got several things. I don't know that you would call it an addiction, though, because we call it an addiction when it interferes with your normal life. And but philosophy has been my normal life, so I don't know if I would call that a harmful addiction or not. But that's not why we couldn't have children, because I was studying philosophy too much, and kept saying, I'll be right up later. No, that's not how that happened. But we do have 4 children. The oldest is now 40 and drives a Prius. Obviously haven't taught him very much if he's driving a Prius.
In Alaska?
Yeah, the other day he got in it and he never even turned it on. It just drove away. I was like, did they turn it on? It's just
So quiet.
gone. But so I have 4 children, but we didn't make them ourselves. We adopted them.
I was in quotations.
Well, you gave him a good home.
Because you can't say we bought them. We adopted Billy in California. He was 4 weeks old. I was at the Defense Language Institute studying Russian, and we got him. Then while we were in Berlin, Germany, my first duty station, Katie was born. She was 3 days old when they handed her to us. And her face, as I said, "Oh, hello," and she looked at me, and I just know her face said, "Who the hell are you?" And I'm absolutely convinced that a fetus recognizes your voice. You've been talking to it for however long since the earbuds started to grow and the brain started to grow, and I'm sure there's stuff going on, and it's already got grammar from hearing your language, and I'm sure that the Mozart effect is a real thing. So you should play music if you're not only pregnant, but also if you have living creatures in your family. You should play Mozart and other kinds of music that are absolutely, repetitive mathematical patterns is what they say, because basically those patterns then are going to be learned by the brain of the creatures in the hearing area, right, of the music. And so that's good for you, as opposed to Charles Ives probably I don't know. Anybody know who Charles? No, we don't want to go there.
So I can blame my dad for why I cuss a lot, right?
If that's the obvious source of your inspiration, or which vocabules you tend to spew on various occasions. I tried to teach my children to create their own power words. We call them power words, and I use argle fargle. So like if I hit my thumb, argle fargle. That's my power word, because I thought that way they wouldn't use any of the more commonly known power words that could get you in trouble with your teachers and things, right? So I thought, each of them had to come up with their own power word so that they would use that. The Fargle Snooter, for example, was one of my daughters. So each of them had their own, special power word, but it didn't really help. One day, my youngest daughter came home and looked at me and said, "Daddy, what does the word fuck mean?"
Yeah.
So, they're obviously going to learn it from... By the way, there's a difference between use and mention, right? I just mentioned it. I didn't actually use the word fuck in that situation. That's mention, right? And you could, as a teacher, you can mention a word, but that doesn't get you in trouble. It's when you use the word that, then you can get in trouble. That's a very important difference. I could teach Karl Marx, but that doesn't mean that I'm a follower of Karl Marx and trying to encourage communism, right? It's an important thing. I'm supposed to cover it, right? So I mentioned Karl Marx. I don't. Yes.
My niece stayed with us for a while because my sister went on a vacation with her husband. And so she gets back in town, and my niece is 1.5 years, and she's walking around her house saying, fuck, 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 fuck. And she thought, because she was saying walk, 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 walk. And she gets back to her house, and she goes, Mom, so she learned a new word, because my mom just tends to cuss a lot. And so, yeah, that was not very good. So she'll go, uh-oh, and then she'll say, fuck, like really loud. So she knows, what it means. But
At least she's got context, right?
yeah, yeah.
It could be scary. Kids are, sponges,
Yeah.
right? They
Yeah.
say. I'm at the point now where the sponge is, going, But I remember my daughter sitting in the back seat of the car. She was, 3? Really young, right? Maybe even younger than that. And we had the radio on. This goes to show how important the music is. Because she's sitting in the back and she starts singing with the song that's on the radio. And that's when I realized what the words were. Because she's sitting back there singing, I want to feel the heat with somebody. And that was pretty frightening, from such a young... Quick, change the channel. Find wordless music. So, when does a fetus become a person? What is a person?
Google it.
I can do better than that. I can go to my own definition. I can go to my class notes, other items, and I can go to what is a person. By the way, that I have that picture with permission from the mother of a child that's 3 now. She's happy that I was able to borrow or use that picture. But so, something is defined as a person. By the way, I've stolen this definition from 2 sources. One is Peter Singer, a philosopher that's on my list, and his definition is of a person. And I've changed it a little bit. And the other philosopher is John Rawls, who's really defining who is a citizen. But I've kind of merged the 2 together. And I end up defining a person as, 1, it interacts with other individuals that consider themselves as individuals. And the type of individual each is viewed by each individual as defined by the other individuals. That is, they are individuals but are dependent on one another for their sense of what that means. So, for example, Alistair McIntyre argues that we are dependent rational animals. It's the title of one of his books. Number 2, it is self-reflecting, or can be, now this is where, so self-reflecting, that's Peter Singer, but that's where he left it off. So basically, a up to a 2-year-old child, strictly speaking, not a person, because they're not self-reflecting. They don't think of themselves as a self. And they don't have language. You need language in order to run the programs that think of me, gee, that person just insulted me by, whatever, or that person just cut me off in traffic, and so I'm being insulted by that. Or, I'm worried about, what the increase in taxes on, or not taxes, but electric rates will be as a result of the Swan Lake fire. It's it's supposed to go up 3%. So I can think all these things because I have language, because I think of me as my family, my connections, etc. But so it's self-reflecting. And then I added, or can be expected to become self-reflecting. So a fetus can become we expect it to be born, to be raised, and around 2 years old, it will become self-reflecting. Chimpanzee, not going to be self-reflecting. Parrot, not really self-reflecting. Elephant, maybe. Dolphin, probably. A dog, no. Dog isn't going to be a person. Pig, not going to be a person. Tree, not a person. Right? Pretty easy that way. But so, it is self-reflecting, or can be expected to become self-reflecting by the other individuals that actively define it as an individual. And by the way, it might be that ants think of one another as persons. I'm not living with ants. I'm not part of their society. So I have no clue what ants think of one another, or what responsibilities they might have, etc. I'm a person. So I'm thinking of how do we define ourselves as individuals. And by the way, that could be dependent on our society. So of course, if I were living in Beijing, my goodness, that would be different, wouldn't it? How different would that be? I have no clue how I would live as a person there. Paris, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable in Paris. I don't know how to live in Paris, or Germany, and all those different places. They're all different societies. I'd have to live there to see how I'd be allowed to live there, etc. And how I should act, right? 3, it does what the others that define it consider appropriate to its position in its relationship to them, such that they can continue to define it as meeting the minimal characteristics a member of their combined self-reflective interrelationship require of each of them. Right? So these are the now notice nowhere there does it say that you have to be a human being. What if Spock, the character from Star Trek, was a real Vulcan? He wouldn't be a human being. He's a Vulcan, right? But would you consider
He's half human. He's a motherly human.
I know Carl Sagan said that you'd have as much chance of doing that as mating a woman with a pickle. That's Carl Sagan. He actually said that in the pack. I heard him say that before he died. Obviously before he died. He's not spoken since he died.
You've heard him talk and he's dead, He's another.
What's the difference between like a humanoid and a human being? Like, why?
Well, this definition is completely concerned with their self-reflection and their interaction with other self-reflecting individuals. So when we talk about AI, artificial intelligence, we're very concerned about when that artificial intelligence becomes a person. When does it become a person? When it can fool us into thinking it's a person? Here's one. Let's see if I can show you. Do we need that anymore? No, we don't, I suppose. How about shoot, Ex Machina, right?
Yeah, it's a good movie.
So how does a programmer get to be meeting the CEO? I won a competition. The president can't get Mr. Garrick on the phone. You got the golden ticket.
It's good to meet you, Nathan. It's good to meet you too, Kevin. Can we just get past the whole employer-employee thing? Cheers. In many ways, this building isn't a house. It's a research facility. I want to talk to you about the greatest scientific event in the history of man. You're building an AI?
Hello.
Hi.
I've never met anyone new before. Have you?
None like you. She's incredible. The challenge is to show you that she's a robot and then see if you still feel she has consciousness.
Do you want to be my friend?
Of course.
Will it be possible?
Why would it not be? Have you never been outside of this building?
We can go together.
Did you program her to flirt with me?
Do you think about me? If you lie, I will know.
No.
Lie.
Maybe she's pretending to like you. Well, why would she do that?
Do you think I might be switched off?
It's not up to me.
Why is it up to anyone? You shouldn't trust Nathan. You shouldn't trust anything he says.
I think it's the next model that's going to be the real breakthrough. And what do you do with the old one?
You have to help me.
One day the AIs are going to look back on us, upright apes, all set for extinction.
It's strange to have made something that hates you.
What were you doing with Ava?
The movie's already made, of course. It's a couple of years old, at least. And in fact, the very last class that we have is after all
So
the
the fun thing with the
assignments
serpent
should
is,
be,
how does a serpent talk?
should be turned into me. So what do we do for that last period of time? Usually I show a movie, and it's a democracy, so you get to vote on what movie you'd like to see, and that's one of the ones I can bring in. I have the DVD, and if you want to see it, if you haven't, then that's one that you could vote on. But so this is based on kind of what's called the Chinese Room experiment, which Hillary Putnam, was it Hillary Putnam? I think it was Hillary Putnam came up with. And the question there is, if you have this computer that you're interacting with, at what point do you feel like the computer is now conscious? And how would you know? What's the test? And if you think of it, well, that's the same question we have as Spock, one of us. Is he conscious? Is he a person? Is the fetus going to be a person? It's not a person yet. course, when we talk about individuals that cannot do this, I mean, they might be human beings, have the genetics, etc., but don't have the capability of being self-reflecting for one reason or another. And maybe, not be able eventually to do that. So they're defective for one reason or another. Of course, traditionally we do respect them in the United States. I think it's pretty clear, though, in other cultures they're often destroyed in some way. I've read some horrible, things. Not horrible in that culture, but I remember reading in a book called Homicide by Daly and Wilson. This book is considered to be one of the beginning books in evolutionary psychology, because the argument about why women might kill their children is explained from an evolutionary standpoint. By the way, men usually, if they kill their children, they kill them older boys. When the boys are old enough to become competitors, it's when men tend to kill children. But women tend to kill their infants. So that's kind of intriguing. And in some cultures, there's even a way for that to happen, say in the village. Yes?
Well, because a lot of times, I don't know, it's a real thing, but it's like postpartum depression. Like a lot of females get really depressed after they have their babies, so they end up like hurting them or killing them, for instance.
And do we know why women have postpartum depression?
Lack of sleep. Lack of sleep.
Lack of sleep? Lack of help? I mean, not every woman that has a baby has postpartum depression.
No, but a lot do.
Part of it's chemical and hormonal.
Yeah. Well, because my sister, she wasn't so depressed, but she would get really anxious all the time. Like she had really bad anxiety. For no reason.
I don't know the answer to this, and I haven't, at least recently, researched this, but do you think the change in our society, I think this is pretty well established, that more women are having children out of wedlock or raising children by themselves? That's the case. Would that cause an increase in women that are experiencing postpartum depression? Tim?
Well, it increases all the risk factors for depression, period.
Right.
Sleep schedule, work schedule, stress, connections, those are all huge risk factors for why people become depressed. Why would it be different for someone who just had a kid? And then you can throw in chemicals to chemical imbalance.
What if there's a statistic on how many women kill not their first child but children afterwards? Like if it's like an initial shock thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like they get in a situation or like they just don't know what to do. They're like, I can't do this for the next 8 years, whatever. It's like kill themselves or what's the other option?
Mm-hmm. So I think their argument is that in an environment where the woman intuitively knows she's not going to be able to handle this child, she'll kill the child. And in some cultures, of course, the culture actually supports it. Yes?
I think it was London, circa like the 1400s, that was a super common practice because of how impoverished everyone was. You had the plague, you had the lack of food, and you had cesspools and ditches filled with bodies. People had unwanted pregnancies because there was no birth control, they didn't have the money, they didn't have the food. That's where the baby went, it's a ditch. And so it's not just cultures from other countries, it could also be just a factor of your situation, what you can do, like you said, whether they know they can support that child or not. How low on Maslow's hierarchy of needs are you operating on a day-to-day basis?
But strictly speaking, in our society, it's pretty obvious